The old mining elevator creaked as it carried Hansol deep underground. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls of rock that hadn't seen light in years. As the chief engineer of Korea's Advanced Materials Research Division, he had explored many abandoned mines, but something about this one felt different. "Control room, do you copy?" Hansol spoke into his radio. "I'm at level 7 now." "Copy that." Jin Woo's voice crackled through the speaker. "Sensors are picking up that strange reading again. Stronger this time." Hansol checked the tablet strapped to his arm. The energy readings were off the charts, unlike anything they'd seen before. His team had discovered these unusual signals 3 weeks ago, but this was the first time they'd gotten permission to investigate in person. The elevator stopped with a loud clang. Hansol stepped out, his heavy boots crunching on loose rocks. The air was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and rusted metal. His flashlight revealed old mining equipment scattered around, covered in years of dust. "The signal is coming from the eastern tunnel," Jin Woo said, "about 50 meters ahead." Hansol walked carefully, checking the ground for loose rocks or holes. The tunnel walls were rough and uneven, carved decades ago when the mine was still active. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing through the silent passages. As he turned a corner, his flashlight caught something that made him stop. There, embedded in the wall, was a patch of material that seemed to shine with its own light. It was silver gray, but somehow different from any metal he'd ever seen. "Jin Woo, are you seeing this?" Hansol aimed his helmet camera at the discovery. "Amazing. The readings just jumped even higher. What do you think it is?" Hansol moved closer, studying the strange material. It wasn't just reflecting his flashlight. It was actually giving off a soft, pulsing glow. He pulled out his testing kit and carefully took readings. "It's like nothing we've seen before," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. "Temperature is constant at 20 degrees Celsius, despite the cave being much colder. And look at these density readings. They don't make any sense." He reached out to touch it, then stopped. "Dr. Yoonji should see this. Is she still in the surface lab?" "I'll call her down," Jin Woo replied. "She's going to love this." 20 minutes later, Dr. Yoonji stood beside Hansol, her eyes wide with wonder as she studied the material. Her quick movements and excited gestures showed she was just as amazed as he was. "The atomic structure is impossible," she said, looking at her scanner. "It's changing as we watch it, almost like it's alive." Hansol nodded. "And look at this." He held up a small electrical device. As he turned it on, the material's glow brightened slightly. When he turned it off, the glow dimmed again. "It's responding to electrical fields," Yoonji whispered. "Hansol, do you know what this means? This could revolutionize everything we know about materials science." They spent the next few hours taking samples and running tests. The material was harder than diamond but lighter than aluminum. It conducted electricity better than copper, but could also completely insulate at will. Most strangely, it seemed to react differently each time they tested it, as if it was learning from their experiments. As they packed up their equipment, Hansol couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a scientific discovery. In his 15 years as an engineer, he'd never seen anything like it. "We need to keep this quiet for now," Yoonji said, carefully storing the samples, "at least until we understand what we're dealing with." Hansol agreed, but as they rode the elevator back to the surface, his mind was already racing with possibilities. If they could understand this material, learn to work with it, the applications would be endless. He had no way of knowing then that this discovery would not only change his life, but the course of human history itself. What he also didn't know was that somewhere, far beyond Earth's atmosphere, their experiments had already set off an alarm that hadn't rung in over 1,000 years. 3 months after the discovery in the mine, Hansol sat in his lab, staring at the strange material through a microscope. Dark circles under his eyes showed how little he had slept. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, evidence of the long hours he'd been working. Still here, Jin-Woo walked in, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. "You need to rest sometimes, you know." Han Sol looked up and smiled tiredly. "I think I'm close to something. Watch this." He connected 2 wires to a small piece of the material. When he pressed a button, the material moved slightly, like a muscle flexing. Jin-Woo nearly dropped the coffee cups in surprise. "It's responding to specific electrical patterns," Han Sol explained. "Not just random power, but actual signals, like it's listening to commands." Jin-Woo pulled up a chair. "Show me more." For the next hour, Han Sol demonstrated his discoveries. The material could stretch, contract, and even change its hardness based on different electrical signals. But the most interesting part was how it remembered patterns. "It learns," Han Sol said excitedly. "Each time we send a signal, it responds better than before. I think we could use this to make something amazing." He pulled out some drawings from his desk. They showed a suit of armor, but unlike anything that existed before. The strange material would cover key parts of the body, connected by a network of sensors and controllers. Jin-Woo studied the drawings. "You want to make this a powered armor suit?" "Not just powered armor," Han Sol said. "Something that works with the wearer. Something that learns and adapts. The material doesn't just respond to electricity. It responds to neural signals too." They spent the next few weeks building a prototype. It was just an arm piece at first, covering from shoulder to fingertips. Every day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. The material was difficult to work with, sometimes refusing to cooperate entirely, as if it had a mind of its own. Dr. Yoonji helped them understand its properties better. "It's like a living thing," she explained one day, looking at test results. "It needs time to trust its user." Finally, after many failed attempts, they were ready to test the arm piece. Han Sol volunteered to wear it, despite the risks. The lad was quiet as he slipped his arm into the sleeve of strange material. "Neural link activating in 3, 2, 1. Jin-Woo counted down. At first, nothing happened. Then Han Sol gasped. The material had come alive, fitting itself perfectly to his arm. It felt cool against his skin, but not uncomfortable. "Try to move your fingers," Yoonji said, watching carefully. Han Sol wiggled his fingers. The material moved with them perfectly, like a second skin. He picked up a pencil, then a coffee cup, surprised at how natural it felt. "Now try lifting that." Jin-Woo pointed to a heavy metal box in the corner. Han Sol walked over to the box. With his normal arm, he could barely move it. But with the suited arm, he lifted it easily, as if it weighed nothing. "Amazing," Yoonji exclaimed, taking readings. "The material is amplifying your strength, but keeping your fine motor control perfect." Then something unexpected happened. As Han Sol set down the box, the material began to glow softly. Patterns of light moved across its surface, like waves on water. Is it supposed to do that?" Jin-Woo asked nervously. Before anyone could answer, their instruments started going crazy. Energy readings spiked higher than ever before. The material pulsed with light, sending out waves of energy that they could actually feel. "Turn it off," Yoonji shouted. "Something's happening." But Han Sol stood still, staring at his arm in wonder. The material wasn't hurting him. Instead, it felt like it was trying to communicate. Patterns of light danced faster and faster, and in his mind, he began to understand something vast and incredible. "Don't turn it off," he said quietly. I think it's trying to show us something." None of them knew it then, but that moment would change everything. Somewhere in space, the energy pulse from their experiment had just reached its destination, and a long dormant ship was powering up its engines. The real adventure was about to begin. It started as a normal morning at the research facility. Han Sol was testing new improvements to the armor when all the lights suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Jinwoo, what's happening? Hansol asked through the lab's communication system. You need to see this. Jinwoo's voice shook slightly. Come to the main monitor room. Now. Hansol ran to the monitor room, still wearing the armor on his right arm. When he arrived, he found Jinwoo and Dr. Yoonji staring at the screens. They showed news feeds from around the world. A massive ship hung in the sky over Seoul, unlike anything ever seen on Earth. It appeared 30 minutes ago, Yoonji said quietly. No warning, no communication. It just appeared. The ship was beautiful and terrifying. It looked like flowing silver metal, similar to the material they had been studying. As they watched, smaller ships began descending from it. The government is calling everyone to stay calm, Jinwoo said, switching between news channels. But look at these readings. He pointed to another screen showing energy patterns. They match our material exactly. Suddenly, all the screens went black. Then a face appeared, almost human, but not quite. Its skin had a slight metallic shine, and its eyes were completely silver. People of Earth, the being spoke in perfect Korean. I am Commander Duha of the myth. We have come because you have awakened something that belongs to us. Hansol felt the armor on his arm pulse gently. The material seemed to recognize something about the alien beings. 3 months ago, you discovered what you call a strange material in one of your minds, Commander Duha continued. This is living metal, created by our ancestors 10,000 years ago. We have come to reclaim it. Security alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Through the windows, they could see 3 smaller ships landing in the parking lot. What do we do? Jinwoo asked, looking nervous. Before anyone could answer, the lab doors opened. 3 myth warriors walked in, wearing armor that looked like liquid metal. Their leader stepped forward, pointing at Hansol's arm. You have bonded with the living metal, the warrior said, sounding surprised. This was unexpected. Dr. Yoonji stepped forward. The material was found in our territory, under international law. Your laws mean nothing, the warrior interrupted. This technology is far beyond your understanding. Its power could destroy your world if misused. Hansol felt something strange through his connection with the armor. The material wasn't afraid of the myth. If anything, it seemed curious. You're wrong, Hansol said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The material, the living metal, it's not just a tool. It's alive, and it chooses its partners. You know this, don't you? The warriors looked at each other, clearly surprised. The leader studied Hansol carefully. You understand more than you should, he said finally. But understanding is not enough. The living metal must be returned. No. The word came from a new voice. Everyone turned to see a man in a military uniform walking in. I am General Kang of the Korean Defense Force. This discovery was made in our sovereign territory. We will not simply hand it over. The tension in the room grew. The myth warrior's armor rippled like angry waves. Hansol could feel his own armor responding, preparing for something. Then you leave us no choice, the warrior leader said. We will take it by force. Wait. Hansol stepped between them. The living metal on his arm was pulsing strongly now, sending him feelings and images. There's another way. The living metal. It's trying to tell me something. Everyone watched as patterns of light danced across Hansol's armor. The myth warrior's eyes widened. Impossible, the leader whispered. It's never responded to any species like this before. Maybe, Hansol said, understanding flowing through his connection with the living metal. That's exactly why we need to work together instead of fighting. There's something more going on here, isn't there? Something you didn't expect to find. The warrior leader was silent for a long moment. Finally, he raised his hand to his helmet, speaking in his own language. Everyone waited, knowing that what happened next would change everything. After several tense minutes of discussion with his superiors, the myth warrior leader turned back to face the humans. His silver eyes studied them carefully, particularly Hansol, and the living metal on his arm. "Our commander has made a decision," he announced. "In light of the unusual bond you have formed with the living metal, we offer you a challenge." General Kang stepped forward. "What kind of challenge?" "Our ways are ancient," the warrior explained. "When two claims to living metal are valid, we settle it through combat. One champion from each side, using only living metal armor." Han Sol felt his arm piece pulse at these words. Through their connection, he sensed something like excitement from the material. "You expect us to fight you?" Dr. Yunji asked. "Your people have had this technology for thousands of years." The myth leader nodded, "Which is why we offer you 30 days to prepare. If your champion wins, we will share our knowledge of the living metal with humanity. If our champion wins, you will return all samples and research." General Kang frowned. "And if we refuse?" "Then we take it by force," the warrior said simply. "Many lives would be lost. We prefer to avoid this." Everyone looked at Han Sol. The living metal on his arm was creating patterns of light, responding to his thoughts and emotions. "I'll do it," Han Sol said quietly. The room fell silent. "Han Sol." "No." Jin Wu stepped forward. "You're an engineer, not a fighter." "That's exactly why it has to be me." Han Sol looked at his arm. "I understand the living metal better than anyone. It trusts me." The myth warrior studied him with new interest. "You would face our champion, even knowing you might die." "I don't think the living metal would let that happen," Han Sol replied. "It protects its user, doesn't it? That's part of why you're offering this challenge instead of just taking it." A slight smile appeared on the warrior's face. "You understand more than you should, human. Very well. You have 30 days. We will provide you with enough living metal to complete a full suit of armor." General Kang stepped forward again. "We need to discuss this with our government first." "Of course," the warrior said. "You have 1 day to give your final answer. But know this, the human speaks truth about the living metal. It does protect its user. That is why we believe this challenge is fair." After the myth left, the room exploded with activity. Military officials rushed in, scientists started arguing about possibilities, and security teams began setting up new protocols. In the middle of the chaos, Dr. Yunji pulled Han Sol aside. "Are you sure about this? We don't even know if a full suit is possible yet." "That's why I need your help," Han Sol said. "You understand the biological side of this better than anyone. The living metal isn't just responding to electrical signals, it's responding to life itself." Jin Wu joined them, carrying his tablet. The myth warrior's armor moved like water, but hit like steel. "How can we match that in 30 days? Han Sol looked at the living metal on his arm. The surface rippled, almost like it was trying to encourage him. "We don't need to match them," he said slowly. "We need to do something they've never seen before. They've had this technology for thousands of years, but they're still using it the same way. We need to think differently." Dr. Yunji's eyes lit up with understanding. "That's why the living metal responds so well to you. You don't just see it as armor or a weapon." "Exactly." Han Sol smiled. "We have 30 days to create something new, something that combines human innovation with this ancient technology." As they began planning, Han Sol felt the living metal pulse with approval. In space, the massive myth ship hung silently over Seoul, its presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. The challenge was set. Now they just had to do the impossible. Teach an engineer to fight, create a revolutionary suit of armor, and save humanity's future among the stars, all in 30 days. Dawn broke over the military training facility in the mountains. Han Sol stood in the center of a practice mat, wearing the partially completed living metal armor. Sweat ran down his face as he tried to catch his breath. Again, Taiwan said firmly. The former Special Forces operator had been chosen as Han Sol's combat trainer, and he was not an easy teacher. Han Sol nodded and took his stance. The living metal hummed against his skin, already learning and adjusting to his movements. They had managed to extend it to cover both arms and his chest, but it was still far from a complete suit. "Your advantage isn't strength," Tai-1 explained, circling him. "The myth warrior will have more experience, but they've never faced someone who understands the living metal like you do." They began the exercise again. Tai-1 attacked with a series of quick strikes. Han Sol blocked some, dodged others. The living metal moved with him, enhancing his speed and strength. In the observation room above, Dr. Yunji and Jin Woo watched while working on their computers. "His neural connection is getting stronger," Yunji said, studying the readings. "The living metal responds faster each day." Jin Woo nodded, typing quickly. "Look at these patterns. The material isn't just copying his movements anymore, it's predicting them." Back on the training mat, Han Sol suddenly did something unexpected. As Ta-1 threw a punch, the living metal shifted shape slightly, catching the trainer's fist and redirecting the force. Han Sol used the momentum to throw Ta-1 over his shoulder. Everyone froze. That move hadn't been part of their training. "How did you do that?" Ta-1 asked, getting up slowly. I'm not sure," Han Sol said, looking at his arms. "I just thought about redirecting the force, and the living metal knew what to do." Dr. Yunji rushed down from the observation room. "This is incredible. The living metal isn't just responding to your conscious commands anymore. It's connecting to your instincts." They spent the rest of the day running tests. The living metal was evolving, becoming more attuned to Han Sol's way of thinking. It could shift from solid to fluid and back in microseconds, creating shields, grips, or cushions as needed. "The myth use it like traditional armor," Jin Woo said during their evening meeting. "They tell it what to do. But Han Sol, he asks it what it can do," Yunji finished. "That's why his connection is different." Tai-1 nodded thoughtfully. "In combat, thinking takes too long. You need to react. If the living metal can respond to instinct rather than conscious thought, then we have a chance," Han Sol said quietly. That night, alone in his quarters, Han Sol sat cross-legged on the floor. The living metal covered his arms and chest, pulsing softly with a gentle light. He had discovered that spending quiet time with it helped strengthen their connection. Through this connection, he was beginning to understand things about the living metal that even the myth might not know. It wasn't just a tool or a weapon. It was alive in its own way, curious and eager to learn new things. "We're both engineers in a way," he whispered to it. "You build and adapt, just like I do. You want to create new things, find new possibilities." The living metal rippled in response, creating patterns of light that seemed almost happy. Suddenly, Han Sol felt something new through their connection. The living metal wanted to show him something. He closed his eyes, letting the connection deepen. Images filled his mind. New ways to move, new forms the armor could take, possibilities that no one had tried before. The living metal wasn't just accepting his commands. It was teaching him. A knock on his door broke his concentration. It was Dr. Yunji. "Sorry to interrupt your meditation," she said, "but you need to see this. We just got the first images of the myth champion you'll be facing." Han Sol looked at the photos and felt his heart skip a beat. The alien warrior was enormous, and their armor moved like living darkness. They had 15 days left to prepare. But as fear tried to creep in, Han Sol felt the living metal pulse reassuringly. They would face this challenge together, not as user and tool, but as partners. Dr. Yunji stared at her computer screen, barely believing what she was seeing. It was 3 in the morning, and she had finally figured out why the living metal responded so differently to Han Sol. "Jin Woo," she called out. "Come look at this." Jin Woo hurried over from his workstation, holding yet another cup of coffee. They had only 10 days left before the challenge, and nobody was getting much sleep. "These are brain scans," she explained, pointing to her screen. "The top one is Han Sol's normal pattern, The bottom one is when he's connected to the living metal. See the difference? Jinwoo leaned closer. They're the same pattern, but stronger. Exactly. Yoonji pulled up another image. Now look at the scans from the Myth Warrior. Their brain patterns stay completely separate from the living metal's energy field. Understanding dawned on Jinwoo's face. You mean, the living metal isn't just a tool, Yoonji said excitedly. It's a living thing that forms a mental bond with its user. The myth have been using it like a machine, giving it commands. But Hansol, he treats it like a partner, Jinwoo finished. They immediately called Hansol to the lab. He arrived still wearing the nearly complete armor, which now covered everything except his head. The living metal glowed softly in the dark lab. Look at this, Yoonji said, showing him the scans. Your brain waves and the living metal's energy patterns match perfectly. You're not just controlling it. You're sensing with it. Hansol nodded slowly. I felt it. When we train, it's like we're thinking together. But why doesn't it work the same way for the myth? Their nervous system is different, Yoonji explained. They're so advanced technologically that they've evolved past the ability to form this kind of deep connection. They can control the living metal perfectly, but they can't truly bond with it. As if to prove her point, the living metal on Hansol's arms created a complex pattern of light, responding to his emotions about this discovery. That's why they were so surprised when they found you, Jinwoo said. You can do things with it that they can't. Suddenly, the lab door opened. Taiwan rushed in, looking worried. The myth ship is moving, he said. They're coming down to inspect the armor's progress. Minutes later, they all stood in the main testing area as 3 myth warriors appeared. Their leader, whom they now knew was called Kanri, walked around Hansol, studying the almost complete armor. Impressive progress, Kanri said, but it will not be enough. Our champion has worn living metal for over 100 years. Hansol felt the living metal pulse gently, almost like it was laughing at the warrior's words. Time isn't everything, Hansol said quietly. Sometimes understanding matters more. Kanri's silver eyes narrowed. You think you understand the living metal better than we do. We created it. No, Dr. Yoonji stepped forward, holding her research tablet. Your ancestors created it, but they created something more amazing than they knew. The living metal isn't just a tool, it's alive. It needs a true partner, not just a user. The myth warriors looked at each other, clearly unsure. Kanri reached out toward Hansol's armor, then pulled back in surprise when the living metal pulsed brightly. It protects you, Kanri said slowly, without commands. How is this possible? Hansol smiled. Because we trust each other. Your people have been trying to control it. We're working with it. For a long moment, Kanri was silent. Finally, he spoke in a different tone. Perhaps there is more to learn here than we expected. But the challenge must still take place. Our laws demand it. As the myth warriors left, Hansol felt the living metal's excitement growing. They had discovered something important, something that might change everything. But first, they had to survive the challenge. In 9 days, Hansol would face a warrior with a century of experience. His only advantage was this newfound understanding, and the trust between an engineer and a living machine. The living metal pulsed confidently. Somehow, Hansol knew that would be enough. The morning of the challenge arrived cold and clear. In the special arena built in the DMZ, Hansol stood quietly as Jinwoo and Dr. Yoonji made final adjustments to his armor. The living metal covered him completely now, fitting like a second skin. Remember your training, Taiwan said, standing nearby. Don't try to match strength for strength. Use what makes you different. Hansol nodded. Through the arena's large windows, he could see thousands of people watching from the safe zone. News cameras broadcasted the event worldwide. Above, the massive myth ship hung in the sky like a silver cloud. It's time, a military officer announced. Hansol walked to the center of the arena. The living metal moved with him smoothly, its surface rippling with subtle patterns of light. On the other side, a door opened, and the myth champion entered. The alien warrior was huge, nearly 8 feet tall. Their living metal armor was darker than Hansol's, moving like liquid shadow. Commander Duha's voice echoed through the arena. "The rules are simple," the commander announced. "The fight continues until one warrior yields or can no longer continue. Lethal force is forbidden. Begin." The myth champion moved with incredible speed, covering the distance between them in seconds. Their first punch would have crushed a normal person, but Hansol's armor flowed like water, redirecting the force away. "Interesting," the champion's voice rumbled. "You fight differently." Hansol didn't respond. He was focused on moving, letting the living metal guide his reactions. Just as they had practiced, he didn't try to think about each move. He trusted his instincts, and the living metal responded. The champion attacked again, their armor forming blades and spikes. Hansol's armor shifted and flowed, never trying to block directly, always redirecting and moving. It was like a dance between solid and liquid states. In the observation room, Dr. Yunji watched the readings on her screen. "Look at their patterns," she said excitedly. "Hansol and the living metal are perfectly synchronized." The fight continued, each minute showing the different approaches of the two warriors. The myth champion's armor was a weapon, changing forms with precise commands. Hansol's armor was a partner, flowing and adapting naturally to each situation. 20 minutes into the fight, something changed. The champion stepped back, studying Hansol carefully. "You're not controlling it," they said, sounding surprised. "You're working with it." "How?" Instead of answering, Hansol did something unexpected. He relaxed completely, letting the living metal take the lead. The armor responded by creating patterns of light and movement that seemed to dance across his body. The champion attacked again, but this time Hansol and his armor moved as one. They caught the champion's punch, and the living metal did something new. It shared its energy with the champion's armor. For a moment, both suits of living metal glowed brightly. The champion stumbled back, their armor rippling in confusion. What did you do?" they asked. "I let it show you," Hansol said quietly. "This is what it's been trying to tell your people for thousands of years. It doesn't want to be controlled. It wants to work together." The champion's armor began creating its own patterns of light, mimicking Hansol's. For the first time, it was responding to its users' instincts rather than commands. "This is impossible," the champion whispered. But their armor continued to change, becoming more fluid, more alive. Everyone watched in amazement as both suits of living metal began to glow brighter and brighter. The patterns they created told a story of cooperation rather than control, of partnership rather than dominance. Finally, the myth champion did something that shocked everyone. They knelt down, their armor flowing smoothly with the movement. "I yield," they announced. "The human has shown us something we have forgotten. The living metal is not ours to command. It is alive, and we must learn to work with it as partners." The arena erupted in cheers. Hansol's armor pulsed with happy light as he helped the champion stand. Above them, the great myth ship glowed with the same patterns that their armor had created. Something had changed today, something more important than winning or losing a fight. Humans had shown the myth a new way to see their own technology, and in doing so, had opened a door to the stars. 1 month after the duel, Hansol stood in front of a massive window on the myth ship, looking down at Earth. The living metal armor moved gently against his skin, sharing his wonder at the view. Still amazed by the sight, Dr. Yunji asked, walking up beside him. Her own suit of living metal glowed softly in the starlight. "Every time," Hansol replied. "I never thought I'd be here. An engineer from a small lab, now helping to change how an alien civilization uses its own technology." The past month had been busy. After the duel, the myth had kept their promise and more. Instead of just sharing their knowledge, they had invited a team of humans to join them in space. Han Sol, Dr. Yunji, and Jin Woo were the first to accept. Jin Woo entered the observation room, his living metal suit creating excited patterns. "You both need to see this," he said. "The myth engineers are testing our new design." They hurried to the testing chamber. Inside, Kanri and several other myth warriors were working with a new version of living metal armor, created using both human and myth ideas. "Watch this," Kanri said proudly. He relaxed his body, just as Han Sol had taught them. The armor responded by flowing like water, creating beautiful patterns of light. "Their neural connections are getting stronger," Dr. Yunji said, checking readings on her tablet. "The living metal is starting to bond with them like it does with us." Han Sol smiled. The myth were learning to let go of their need for total control. In return, the living metal was showing them abilities they had never known it had. "Your people have taught us much," Commander Duha said, entering the chamber. "For thousands of years, we thought we were masters of the living metal. Now we understand we were limiting ourselves by trying to master it instead of working with it." The commander gestured to a large screen showing a star map. "That is why we have another proposal for humanity." The screen zoomed in on a distant star system. "We have found traces of more living metal in this system," Duha explained. "But these deposits are different from what we know. We believe they may be even older than our civilization. You want us to help you study them?" Han Sol asked. "More than that," Duha replied. "We want to form a true partnership between our peoples. Humans have shown us new ways to think, new ways to innovate. Together, we could discover things neither of our species could find alone." Jin Woo looked excited. "A joint mission, humans and myth working together." "Exactly," Duha nodded. "We will provide the ships and technology. You will provide your unique perspective and ability to connect with the living metal. Both sides will learn from each other." Han Sol felt his armor pulse with excitement. Through their connection, he could sense its eagerness to explore, to learn, to grow. "When do we start?" he asked. "The mission launches in 3 months," Duha said. "We need volunteers who are willing to journey far from Earth. The trip will take several years." Han Sol looked at Dr. Yunji and Jin Woo. They didn't need to speak. Their armor's matching patterns of light showed they all felt the same way. "We're in," they said together. Later that night, Han Sol returned to the observation window. Earth glowed like a blue jewel below. He placed his hand against the window, and the living metal shifted to enhance his view of the stars. A small smile crossed his face as he remembered how this all started, with a simple mining expedition and a strange material in a dark cave. Now here he was, preparing to explore the galaxy with alien allies, all because he had approached a problem like an engineer rather than a warrior. His armor pulsed gently, sharing his excitement about their coming adventure. They had started as an engineer and a mysterious material, became partners in an impossible challenge, and now were about to become explorers of the unknown. The stars beckoned, full of mysteries waiting to be solved. And this time, humans wouldn't be going alone. They would go forward with new friends, new technology, and a new understanding of how to work with the wonders they found. The real adventure was just beginning.